Hey everybody, Chris Albert here, and today we're going to install the tools we need to get started for developing SQL Server integration services packages. Today we're going to install Visual Studio 2019 and the associated SQL Server integration services extension. We aren't using SQL Server Integration Services 2022 extension with Visual Studio 2022 because that extension is in preview still. It is only on version 0.3 as of this recording. So to avoid some bugs, we're just going to stick with the tried and true 2019. All right, let's get into it. So to download Visual Studio 2019, we're going to head over to the download page and download the Community Edition, which is free. Once it's downloaded, all you have to do is right-click on the executable and run as admin. You get this little pop-up, says it needs to do a few things before it can configure the install. Hit continue. And in here, it's just going to download all the required components since this is a light installer that's downloaded from the site. All right. Once it's downloaded all the components it needs, we need to pick out all the options that we want. So for our purposes here, we are only concerned with working with SQL Server and integration services. So we're going to scroll down and we are going to look for the data storage and processing. We're going to check that off. You notice over here, it's going to require about 7 gigabytes of disk space. And then we're just going to go ahead and hit install. This should take a few minutes to download and then install. And it's done. Now that we have Visual Studio 2019 installed, we just need to install the extension for SSIS. So we're going to close this. And if we go to the extension page in the Visual Studio Marketplace, we can download this extension for free. Once downloaded, same process, find the file, right-click, run as admin. Once the pop-up comes up, it'll ask you what language you want. I'm going to stick with English. Hit OK. In the welcome screen, hit Next. And here it will list out versions of Visual Studio installed. We want this to be installed for Visual Studio 2019, which we previously installed. Go ahead and hit Install. And this will run through the process of installing the extension to Visual Studio. All right, and integration services has been installed. So let's close this out, get back to our desktop, and we can test out Visual Studio. All right, so I see Visual Studio here. We're going to launch it. All right. So this will come up the first time that you launch Visual Studio. You can sign in if you want. I'm going to hit Not Now, Maybe Later, because I just want to get started right away. It's going to ask you to choose a theme. I'm a huge fan of the dark theme, so I'm going to pick that. It's also going to want you to pick development settings. You can stick with general. That's what I usually do. If you want to choose something else, it's totally up to you. Once you're done deciding on your options, hit Start Visual Studio. It'll take a couple minutes to set things up for you before it pops up. So now Visual Studio 2019 is up. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new project and make sure that we can choose integration services as a new project. That's how we know the extension installed successfully. So hit Create New Project. All the available projects that you have in Visual Studio will come up. We're going to search for integration services. And as you can see, we have 3 different options. I'm going to choose the vanilla integration services project and hit Next. I'm just going to leave the default name and hit Create. Perfect. Visual Studio 2019 is up and running successfully. We also got the SQL Server Integration Services extension installed and running successfully. So now we can get started making our first integration services package. Thanks for joining me.